July 14th. I'll try and make this short and sweet because I think sometimes I get a little boring on my podcast. So, what is it? Social media. I'm commenting on a hate crime or a slur, and I'll use the analogy of Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels went to the island of Lilliput and saw tiny people, went to another island and saw giants. So for me, when the Calgary Stampede rolls in, it's like Gulliver's Travels. And in Gulliver's Travels, there was horses, centaurs, and I think they were called yahoos. So, and I'm using this analogy in terms of white people who wear cowboy hats, or anybody who wears a cowboy hat at the Calgary Stampede. But there was this Yahoo that pushed this indigenous young man, and the indigenous young man asked him, like, stop pushing me. And the fellow who was drinking came on and said, well, do you want to go home in a hearse? And then it escalated to the point where this Yahoo says to him, do you want to be buried like with your ancestors in those Indian residential schools? Now, the reason it's an uproar is because it's been on social media ever since the incident happened, trying to identify the Yahoo. Now they've identified this Yahoo, but the reality of it is like the Calgary City Police or whoever isn't going to do a damn thing because again, we're Indigenous people. This is what happens to us on a daily basis, and rightfully so for my not an excuse why I live in an Indigenous community. This is my choice. However, just the propensity of the hate, uh, like you hear it. I mean, I know young people feel it all the time, and as an elder, I've lived it my whole life. It's not like I psychologically block it out. It's just the reality of like feel going places where I feel safe. And like this morning, I had the tribal police come and introduce me to a new constable, female constable. We exchanged phone numbers, and she is my private constable. And they're doing this for all the elders here in Sutina, which is really nice. Gives me a sense of safety because if I have any emergency, anything I need, I can call her. And and that's nice. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm going to cry, but I haven't had a partner or children or grandchildren. Even when I traveled to Las Vegas, I was surprised that a young Yahoo said he was going to come with me. And the fact that he spent his own money to fly here and to fly to Las Vegas with me and escort me around, I've never had that ever. Like I said, it sounds really pathetic that for me as an elder to be seen as somebody so invisible. But again, it comes with privilege because that invisibility is also a way of protecting myself. So the reason I'm talking about this systemic racism or this uh, occurrence that happened at the Calgary Stampede is an analogy that one of my associates or acquaintances, a young woman who's so influential in social media, and again, I listen to quite a few Indigenous women on social media, and the bottom line is, as Indigenous women, we need to tell our narrative. We need to tell our story, either in book form, theater, whatever media we choose. And this young woman has been getting comments and people talking to her about, her advocacy for trying to find out who the perpetrator was, this Yahoo. And the thing is, they found out his name, posted it. Now, do you think anything's going to happen to you? Because the video is obvious, but do you think that the Calgary police are going to charge him? The statistics, and this is what this acquaintance of mine, and I don't mention her name due to privacy, and most people would have known her too, because sometimes she's appeared on my podcast, her voice at least. And they were saying something about banning or influencing Muslims against Indigenous peoples. And her comment was that the statistics are Muslim people and immigrants have more human rights than Indigenous people. And the statistics of Muslims and immigrants reporting hate crimes and having justice, like to bear witness to the injustice that was given to them through systemic racism, the charges go to court. Now, the reality of that is the truth. And under the Indian Act, we are not protected. We immigrants have more rights than Indigenous peoples. And part of my narrative, and part of why people invite me into the city to talk, like people from Africa, uh, we'll say Japan, India, is because they're immigrants. And even though they've lived in Canada for a decade or so, there are still a lot of misconceptions of exactly, what has happened in terms of history here. The and again, I'm just using the term Yahoo uh, offhand. So, I'm not describing all Yahoos as being racist, even though, to me, like I'm just using it as an analogy rather than saying white people. But a Yahoo, like I said, immigrants who come in, I'm not saying they're Yahoos. I'm just saying sometimes when there's so many different people from different islands and different notions of like cultural references from their own background, it's amazing that there's a lack of understanding of when they're coming to the Americas of this romantic notion or this mysticism or something that we'll say the land of the Yahoo has created for Indigenous people. Uh, those stereotypes and those mythologies and those phenomena created for the illusion or delusion or illusion to make people feel comfortable in their own skin, it comes at a price. And it's okay to feel uncomfortable when you're around me, but I do sense it, and I will confront it. I have no qualms about challenging people about what they say and how they interact with me. Sometimes it's quite annoying that people don't even know they're doing that because they just offhandedly, off the cuff, have some problems in their own personal lives. Maybe they're not getting attention from the other Yahoos. I don't know, but they seem to want to gravitate to minorities. And throughout my life, I've seen that. I had a friend of my dad's, his friend's name was Jack, and Jack also had a son, and I went to art school with his son, and um, his son was talking about his parents and how religious they were, that they didn't even sleep in the same bedroom, the same rooms, same bed, even though they were married and had three children, two girls and one boy, and how his mother was an alcoholic who would go like away on Monday evenings with her girls, and she'd get pissed drunk. Uh, Really staunch religious family. But the reality of it, though, is from the point of view of their child, was like they, this religiosity of privilege that they knew how to help the poor. They knew how to help Indigenous people, like as if they were God sent to, help the poor because, here they are well off. Doesn't mean to say their life in themselves, their private life was perfect. Far, far from it. But it's this projection of insecurity that people tend to want to gravitate to the unknown or what seems to be someone or something or some, in terms of Indigenous people, that we need their help. Well, again, rightfully so. Like I said, I've been around white people my entire life. Again, my narrative, a lot of Indigenous women haven't had that, and some who have never been around Indigenous people either. Um, but I've been Indigenous people my entire life. And like I said, I've got white uncles. I've been around well, white people my whole life. Even when I lived in Utah, I had that's all I had for roommates. And I say because of that, I know how different I am. I know how people even my roommates who I'm living with interacted with me. And at the same time, too, it's surprising that I don't know, people just don't think we have emotions, or somehow we're immune to emotions. Like I said, this invisible cloak we wear. Now, I know that people just want to stay in reality, but the reality is a lot of people in the real world live in that space, that disassociated space, that illusional space, the delusional space. A lot of us try to find balance in walking this road. I give credit to this young woman who advocates and fights against and educates systemic racism. That's her narrative. And, without her, I don't think I would have the courage to keep on doing my podcast. Now, why, you may ask? Well, 20 years ago when I started my blog, I just typed. Sometimes I put out more, like maybe one blog a month or every 6 months. And sometimes I'd get an email saying, is this blog still active? That would realize, like, oh my goodness, people are reading my blog. But at the same time, too, with a podcast, it's a little different because it's a narrative. It's a storyline. So I'm going to try and do the best I can. I know I'm a good storyteller. So I'll start this podcast with, and like I said, I had to do the introduction because, like I said, it's like Gulliver's Travels. I really love the book, and sometimes when I don't think I'm literate enough, and I realize the amount of books I've read, like it's not like they say every book you read you become, and so this narrative and how I see myself is like in Gulliver's Travels. Like it's an analogy. And I think in reality, that's how the world is becoming. I think the more the earth is, and where more social media has evolved, has created this network. Some of my podcasts go to Finland. Some go overseas, and a large majority of my listeners are American citizens. And I'm sorry, but the president of the United States is a sad sack. The president of the United States is so sad. I can't even comprehend. If I had a character and I was acting out like this human being, people would make fun of me. I don't know how people would even follow me. I mean, look at my podcast. There are probably some people who are so ignorant that that's how they see me, like as if I'm this sad sack, like poor Indigenous woman, like trying to make sense out of her life. But the reality of it is like, oh my goodness, the amount of crime, the amount of just behavior that people have allowed to put up with. I mean, I know you can't change people. For me, I'd sooner live alone and not be around people who assume a hell of a lot about my life, or even think like if they associate with me and somehow pick my brain and claim it as their own. I'm done with that. I know my podcast is open for interpretation, and people could take this information and even write a book about what I'm saying, and that's okay. That's fine because, like I said, I'm just one of thousands of Indigenous women who are who are talking about their lives and how they've lived and managed to grow old or live and just function. Because it's not easy. It's not easy for Indigenous women. The women that I know who chose to have children. It's a far easier life when you choose not to have children and live in Indigenous communities. Again, what can I say? During the Calgary Stampede, the Sutuna police had a float. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my goodness, we do have Indigenous people working with our police force, but you couldn't see them. And so this morning I asked the constable who came, I said, you know, when you had the parade, the men should have wore like the ribbon shirts, and they wore a ribbon vest made by a female elder who passed away this week. And her funeral, her wake will be on Wednesday, and then this week will be her funeral. And this woman chose to have children, and she chose to do all the work she could to even foster children. And the amount of beadwork and cultural, like she was, even though she might not see it, she was this artist. And but everybody just looked at her as this matriarch. Now, the fact that she preserved and created her culture and shared it with her children and grandchildren, like that's, like I don't want to use the word phenomenal because it's mixed up with phenomena. She designed the T-shirts, and I said to the constable, it would have been nice if the female constable wore ribbon skirts, and she said it was just too hot. So I said, well, even to have an eagle feather in their cap, their Stetson hats they were wearing, anything to the imagery of like this is Indigenous. And she said that the elder male whose wife had passed away may have eagle feathers. So the whole concept of respecting elders is embracing our culture through us, through the elders. And I'm really grateful that I've grown up here my whole life and that I could do this podcast. And I'm grateful when I'm invited and talk about systemic racism so that young people can see how empowered they are. Now, the narrative again. I know I'm a good storyteller, so why the hell don't I get to it? Again, hold on. It's been smoky outside, so my voice changes because of just anyway. How do I start? Long time ago, in a very isolated little house, I lived. Very often not even seeing another human being for days, years. I mean, I'd walk to school when I was 5. It was about a mile away. On Sundays, we'd walk to church, which was probably about, 5 miles? So as a child, I walked a lot. And I also like, since my family were rodeo people, I rode bareback. I used to get on my grandfather's horse saddle with a saddle. My relationship with my grandparents, as much time as they could give me, they did. But the reality of it is going into the city schools, mixing with white people, and coming home on the bus, being back in Tsuut'ina. I didn't realize the total impact it had on my social adjustment and development until I started meeting other Indigenous people from across Canada who didn't have the same opportunities that I had and who had hardly ever been around white people. The whole thing about this too is like my mother was afraid of white people her entire life. And people can't comprehend that. I think immigrants, I don't think immigrants can comprehend that. But it's the notion of what Indian residential school did to the psyche of so many children. Much the same too, I think, when children are raised in family violence and they see so much violence. Now, recently on Facebook, I saw that one tribe had taken over the sovereignty of their child and family services. And so, like I said, a lot of things that immigrants have more rights because they're not under the Indian Act, even when it comes to their children. Certain things that people just sort of look and say, oh, Indian women aren't good mothers. No, we're under the Indian Act. We're under the Indian Act, and we've been displaced in terms of our human rights since the beginning. So yeah, that's why it's important for Indigenous women to tell their stories. Now, for me, why do I concentrate on Nathan Chasenhorse? Well, because he's just one individual, but the reality of he's Indigenous. Another reality is like he's Sioux, he's Lakota, I'm Dakota. Another thing is like his spiritual practices. My mom, my aunties, my uncle, my grandfather, all spiritual people. So it intrigues me to understand him because of the way I was raised, and it's like I try to explain. You're raised a certain way, especially around the languages. And when you're raised that way, you treat each other with a certain respect or a certain way of knowing. And Nathan would have understood this, but a lot of people who weren't raised that way wouldn't. And so, again, it's just a certain quality. I know a lot of people are hypothetical, and they'll, especially, let's call white women the Yahoo mayors. Yahoo mayors. I'm so silly, but again, Gulliver's Travels and I mean, am I in the land of Lilliput? Anyway, the Yahoo mayors tend to whatever for whatever reason. In the land of Yahoo, they're not satisfied with their male counterparts, so they think that they can have say over Indigenous men and Indigenous culture and mansplay and just say that they have the rights to come into our ceremonies, never having been raised in the community, but only in the land of Yahoo. Okay. So, I mean, I use that analogy just to make fun because that's how funny it is. That's how funny it is. They just don't get it. And again, I'm from a place where I've grown up around Yahoos. And when a Yahoo says, "Oh, make it rain," or "Can you predict the sun?" or "Can you predict when it's going to rain? Can you do a rain dance?" Like in the land of Yahoo, when they'd ask me these questions, I say, "Okay, yes, I will." Because if a Yahoo is stupid enough to think I have power over the weather, then how stupid are they in other things, especially when it comes to healthy human sexuality? So, I string them along and say, sure, go ahead. I kind of like systemic racism. If they don't get it, then let them boil in their own juices, their own fat, their own stew. Because, what do they care? Do they really give a damn about, where I live, how I lived? I always use the analogy of like I've grown up my entire life next to the city of Calgary as a child. Yet when tragedy hits and somebody dies in my community who's actually been bussed into the city and we have the funerals, we don't see white people. Like again, the funeral that's going to happen, there'll maybe a handful of white people that'll come to the funeral. I don't know if it's what it is about the land of Yahoo that they're afraid to go to funerals, or just they have the disconnection of community. But I always, as a child, I always thought, why is it that the Yahoo will be friends with people in my community, but when it comes to supporting, where are they? Where are they when it comes to grief and helping? Only if you go into therapy, the therapies, and you become a counselor, where you sort of get this aha moment of like, I am doing good. I pat myself on the shoulder, and again, why? Why go into the therapies? I was talking with a young woman on a project that we've been working on, and we're working with elders. And one of the elders has lived in Calgary, and he's not he's from the Treaty 7 area, but most of his life he's lived in the city. And she said, well, we're going to get him to do some prayers. And I said to her, we're trying to get the Treaty 7 communities involved. I don't think it would look appropriate for you to invite him, even though he's been engaged in a lot of the city structures, and the city uses him. I said, within our communities, each of our communities has our own spiritual people. It'll be important to use the protocols to invite these people who still live in the communities rather than within the city. So when I talk about urban living versus country, like First Nations, Inuit or Métis communities, it almost seems like how did she put it? She says, "Well, I have my status card. I'm Indigenous." I said, "No, you have to understand this. You could have your card, but if you've never lived in an Indigenous community, and you've lived in an urban area your whole life, or like or you don't know, you don't really know your relatives, you've never lived, maybe you visited, but the fact is you're so urban that you've disconnected from the very grassroots of the earth, the community, Inuit, Métis, or First Nations." I said that in itself says that we have status. Within our own communities, we have our own membership codes. Again, something that was taken away from us. So when we have our own Indigenous people who have status cards questioning our values and beliefs for people who are actually living in these communities, it is a problem. And so I'm trying to orientate the fact that there's also lateral violence. And so I tried to explain to her, I said, yes, you do invite me because of my art background, like the things I advocate for public art, my understanding of just the artist community and the volunteer work I've done in my youth, and even for me to have a Bachelor's of Arts degree. I have a painting at the University of Saskatoon Law Library. I've had my work displayed, but it was very difficult for me to, like, I'm not even considered like a professional artist. However, it's the reality of my art background that gives me a bit of clout in, especially being Indigenous and a female. So a lot of things that this lady and I have had in a relationship, not only that, but she's got a background in psychology. So with my understanding of childhood behavior also plays into how we communicate and how we get along in discussing certain matters of, for example, lateral violence. So I made a comment to her. I said, we're talking about Tsuut'ina, and I said, you know the woman who you need to engage with. And I went on to talk about the men around who are spiritual leaders. And I said it's one thing to understand this. I said, because it's important that you realize this, even though you're going through women, I said, who are working for the nation. Understand this: the spiritual people are male. There's still patriarchy in how it was structured because of the colonial mindset of the Indian agents when they were the guardianships in our trust funds, in how we took care of that trust money that was coming in. See, people always think it's taxpayers' money. No, this is trust money. Why else do you think the Indian agents from all over came into First Nations for work? Because they were managing the trust. Now, even in the treaties. So again, I'm trying to explain to this young woman who has her status card, and she says, "Well, I give back." I said, "No, that's not the issue." I'm trying to explain to her, it's one thing, that Indigenous people who don't live in communities have their status card, but I'm trying to say to her, a lot of people who are millionaires who have those status cards don't need to access money. I said, and a lot of people who do get grants and do access Indigenous monies use a status card, even though they've never lived in First Nations, Inuit, or Métis communities. And my question is, how are they going to pay back? How are they going to, not interest in terms of money, but in terms of what they're contributing for Indigenous people or the Indigenous ways of knowing. So I'm trying to explain to her, you can me to these meetings, and people in my community know me, but there's also this misunderstanding of, like, why are you asking Marina Crane? And I said to her, this is the issue. I said, I'm not stepping on anybody's feet because they don't know why I'm invited. They don't see the art background. They have their own job when it comes to historical references and what the city does in terms of cultural heritage sites. Each of the tribes in Treaty 7 have that. So I'm trying to say to her, uh, it has to do with misogyny and lateral violence. See, and that's the hardest thing for me, is even though she's got a status card and she's working with these public art projects and has all this background and she's trying to help because she's Indigenous as herself, uh, I have to say to her, there's a difference between talking to me and talking to this other woman who's from my community. That we're both from the community, but things are different. See, I've grown up here my whole life, whereas this woman married in, had children as a grandmother. And I made a comment, I said, even how I promote uh, the young artist within my community, that they don't even know I've been advocating for them, and how they started getting projects, and how I advocated for professional artists to help them and navigate through the system in public art. Now, all this isn't just me. It was a catalyst uh, that started off with a group of artists in Calgary. So that's my background. And I'm trying to say to this young woman, the other woman has all this staff. She has access to a lot of things. And mind you, she's younger than me. But the protocol is that it goes through her husband. And so she says, I said, you need to contact the husband and you need to contact the husband's uncle. I said, because you contact them and they will refer you to this woman. And from her, she can access the funds to help these two men, these spiritual men. I said, that's the protocol. Uh, like for me, if she contacted me, I have nobody. I'm a woman. I have no status in terms of money. Whereas a man who's lived here in Sultana, if they're married to a woman who's working in the administration office, they have status, they have pull. And I said, and that's lateral violence, that's systemic racism, that's the way women are treated, which is different if you're a woman living in the city and have status card. You go through your own hierarchy with your own organization, but it's different because you don't know the people, like from childhood to when they were teenagers to being married, having children and grandchildren. It's a whole different landscape. So in order for her to have the best human experience in promoting her project, which is a huge project in the Treaty 7 area, is to follow those protocols and make the extra effort to we'll say bond or navigate with the different tribes in their spiritual practices, which is totally different. Now, some people might say, "Oh, well, that's so redundant and that's so difficult." And I'm going, no. If it were a non-indigenous person, we'll say from the city of Yahoo, again, Gulliver's Travels, approaching a tribal representative, the tribal representative will say, "We want formal invitation from the head Yahoo, because you're trying to invite our head person." I said, those are the protocols, and if you step out of boundary with them, it's going to be harder to navigate and negotiate networks, because each person is networking in this web. But understand this: even though you're approaching and talking to Indigenous women, however we are seen and however we can help is only a ripple. So whatever influence I have in stimulating or talking to people is just a ripple. It takes somebody to actually say, okay, we're going to do it. And it's usually the woman talking to the husband, and the husband saying, "Okay, let's do it." Especially too acknowledging the husband with tobacco, with protocols, those things. See, I've never had that, and I tried to explain to this young woman, I've grown up here my whole life, systemic racism, lateral violence, how people see me is totally different than how people see this woman who's a grandmother. See, I've never had a husband or children or grandchildren. So even how people see me is totally different because I bring along a different narrative than most Indigenous women or most Indigenous matriarchs. My matriarchy is just something given to me because of my sexuality, because of my age. It doesn't mean like I'm protected from misogyny. In fact, it makes it all the more critical when I even talk in my own community or I sit in my own community and how people see me or engage with me, because I've had experience with people who just hate me because I have a voice, because I speak my truth. And again, I'm saying it's important for Indigenous women to use whatever narrative they can, poetry, books, at podcasts, blogs, whatever means to tell your story is important. Because I'm not the only one who's experienced these things. And even if my listeners, if you come from the land of Yahoo, and when we're speaking this language through this catalyst called social media, the reality of it is like, yes, I speak English, but the behavior and the protocols, the unseen protocols that I've just lived with, that I've grown up with, and that I tread on lightly, it is proven. It's proven. Like I'll use an example. I had twin roommates. They were Dakota Sioux, and they'd been adopted by Mormon family when they were just babies, and the parents had given them up, three of them, two, the twins and one sister, to one family. And about an hour after they had dropped them off in this Mormon ranch in Montana, the family decided they said, no, well, we shouldn't do this. We'll go back and pick up our children. We've changed our minds. So when they went back to the ranch, the Mormon family had guns and told them to get the hell off their property, and started shooting at them. So they had that, again, systemic racism, and who's going to believe Indian people that, these white people have stolen their children. Anyway, that's the story of my former roommates. And when they were trying to reconnect with their parents, they asked me if I would accompany them to the Dakotas. So I went, and again, you have to be raised and born in the culture and how the community sees people. Because there's a certain, like I said, my name is Hapa, my brother's name is Cheske. Growing up and hearing those names, I just thought everybody was talking about me. So there's this connection of like, it might seem idiocentric. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right. But the reality of it is there's a certain presence. And so, I honor that when I go into Indigenous communities, especially with my Sioux background. And I'm embraced. I embrace, and then we leave, we release this. So on the way back, my two former roommates said to me, Marina, we just met our aunt, but when you just met her too, but you got along as if you've known her your entire life. Well, it's not knowing her my entire life. It's the reciprocity. It's the cultural protocols. It's the sense of like how to engage. Like you sense it. Like I said, you've got to be born and raised in it to sense it. I think it's like, say, learning a European language. You hear two Europeans talking and you're going, oh my goodness, what are they saying? Well, they know what they're saying. Because they can hear each other. Well, in the same sense, even though the Sioux are speaking English, there's still something, and I always say like there's this great mystery, this energy that we sort of embrace, and I think it's in every culture. I'm not trying to say it's just. I'm using it as an example, and so I think when people are detached from that type of orientation or that type of um, structure or the cultural knowledge or even the pride of being indigenous, no matter how poor you are, it does have meaning. So, like I said, it's one thing to have a status card. It's another thing to actually live in the community. It's important to understand the people who you're living with. It's important to, understand the struggles of people within that community as well. So it's not easy. Yeah, I don't think any life in itself is ever easy, but I do want to mention that again it's important to tell your story. Now, I know I've been sort of itchy. There's an itch like that I want to scratch. Like yes, there is some common sense in telling people about how I grew up and and the reasoning behind my curiosity around human behavior. I think a lot of times I would look at my parents and wonder why they behaved the way they did, or even look at white parents whose my classmates would invite me over to their homes, and I would wonder, why are they behaving this way? It's one thing to know that you can speak and breathe and you eat, but it's another thing when you're invited to a white home to spend the weekend and they ask you to take a bath, and you go and you take a bath with your sister, and the whole family comes into the bathroom to watch us take a bath, like as if our sexual organs and our nipples and our hair or something in our physical body is different than theirs. Yes, in this day and age. Heck, I know it sounds terrible as human beings would, you know, like my mother. We have I have a black niece. Her I think her father's from the Caribbean, and when my sister first got her, she was only a few months old, yeah, a couple of weeks old, and my mother, she was changing her diaper, and she says she's black all over, like little things like that. Because we're not, my mom in residential school, she says we didn't get dolls that were brown skin, we didn't get dolls with white skin, we got black dolls. In Indian residential school, they gave us black dolls to play with. So she was looking over my sister's daughter and realizing, yeah, it's not just in dolls, it's in human beings, like they're all black like the dolls. Things like that my mother would say that astonished me. And even the fact that, bless her heart, a lot of the things she asked me about life, uh, I just assumed that she knew a lot of things that, and again, she didn't. I mean, questions like, why is the sky blue? What happens inside the TV screen, like with cartoons? Abstract thoughts. My mother was very gifted in horticulture. She was a very strong Dakota woman who raised all of her children on her own. I mean, my father, the early part of my life, was he was a good provider. But then he passed away when he was 52. Uh, it's just the reality of not growing up with a father and trying to manage my life. There were many opportunities, where I could have, should have, would have, but didn't take or the bite any kind of, what they call it when somebody tries to create a trap. They put a bait in the trap so you can go and eat it, and they trap you. Well, that's how I felt about being in a relationship with Indigenous men. It's like, oh, they're setting a trap for me. Now, why would I think that? Well, again, because if there's so much violence, and that's the only way Indigenous man can get a woman, because after they trap you, then they can do whatever the hell they want to do to you, and I just didn't feel comfortable in being trapped, and so a lot of my conversations with all men, including men from the Yahoo tribe, it's always challenging, and I don't tend to poo-poo it and say, "Oh, I make life for men who talk to me comfortable." I don't. It I don't do it deliberately. It's spontaneous because I haven't been around it, and it and I'm not pleading ignorance. I'm just telling the truth. There are some things I have never engaged with men because I've never been married, and a lot of women out there sort of like who've been in relationships and who've had children. uh, it's important for me to talk to them about their experience so I can sort of get a gist of basically what it is that I missed or didn't miss. And decades ago I flew from Calgary to Salt Lake City, and I met a woman who was 85. I hope I'm traveling around at 85. And we're talking, and she said, I was in high school, met my husband. We got married right out of high school, never knew any man at all. And she said 15 years ago, he passed away. There was no violence, no, like he wasn't messing around as far as she knew. She said, he's the only man I ever knew. She says, I didn't know what it was like to be single her whole life. She had a husband. So she told me, she says, in the 15 years I've traveled all over the world, like whatever capital he had managed to create while he was alive, supporting her, she was able to travel. And she says to me, never get married. She says, I didn't know what it was to be free, to make your own choices. And most Indigenous women who've been married and who are elderly now, they'll say, "Oh, my husband would always check what I was wearing, like what clothes I was wearing, how I dressed, my makeup, my hair." Like I can't even comprehend that. I've had white roommates and I've had my own siblings as roommates, and it bothers me to no end when somebody tells me how I should look and how I should dress, or like really explaining to me like how I should function, or uh, how would I what I should do to be more acceptable or appropriate. Like, do you need to take a shower? I'm going, no, I don't want to shower. If I'm going to stink, let me stink. if or do your hair, can I do your hair? Well, go ahead. Like, if it's messy, it's messy. Little things that people just sort of don't realize, and I'm thinking, how can I couldn't, like, I've never had that. I've always had to just do my own thing, take care of myself, groom myself, clean myself, dress myself, feed myself, pay my bills. Everything I've had to work for on my own. And it amazes me too how most women who have struggled their entire lives, uh, and I mean like through family violence, through uh, like the affairs, the violence with the partner, infidelity, uh, just their whole struggle to keep on making money, even to the point, like I have a lot of people that I knew as teenagers who I went to residential school with. Again, the residential school wasn't like the same as most people experienced. This was in Portage La Prairie, where we were bused into the town to go to school and came home to live in the residence. Mind you, years before, people actually went to school in the residence, like my grandmother. these young women that I've known since they were 15 years old, and even relatives who, I've known like throughout my life and I'm friends with, they chose to have children. Again, the marital affairs with, divorce, separation, and the fact that they are the mothers. The fathers seem to just sort of think that they don't have any part of raising their own children, whereas in again under the Indian Act, okay, whereas people who live in urban areas who are not Indigenous, who are not under the Indian Act, they can take their partners for child support. Okay, there's no consequences of like what's happening to the children. And usually too, when parents divorce and like non-Indigenous people, it seems like once the children grow up, they sort of disconnect with their parents. So the lack of connection with the divorced parents is, and the lack of community is far more of a fracture. Whereas Indigenous community, trying to get child support is really difficult, but it can be done. The only difference is sometimes the man just doesn't work. So how do you get money from them, or they hide it? Again, too, my late brother paid child support, but his first wife never told their children that they were getting child support. So they always had this hatred towards my brother. And yet, again, how we see each other, this whole need to be up one notch, like that they got to prove that they're better than me. One more, like for one instance, like my uncle passed away, and my 15-year when I knew his the mother of his only child, she was 15 when she first met my uncle, and he was like, I think 4 years older than her. So he passed away, and I met his granddaughter this summer, and I said to my friend, I said, if if your granddaughter needs any help from escaping her violent relationship, she can call me anytime. I'm here for her, because she lives in Drumheller. And again too, like networking like that with other Indigenous women to help Indigenous young women is important, and it's important for women to know, like, okay, to let other women know you're not alone. I'm here for you. That's just part of the whole narrative, especially when there's so much. The word is witnessing justice coming to you. So the fact that most women, I had a friend for 30 years, never collected child support, worked her whole life, raised her children, and yet her husband was from Tsuut'ina. Violent man, used to play Russian roulette with his sons while he was pissed drunk, beat the crap out of her. The violence. I was friends with her for over 30 years. I've never had a friend like this. Like I may talk to all of you out there in my podcast, men and women who are listening, but I've never had a friend like her. I was promiscuous when I became friends with her, and we'd go out night clubbing, well, bar hopping, and if I felt horny and saw this guy, made contact, hooked up, and I'd tell her I'm going to go home with this guy, and next morning I'd call her, pick me up, we'll meet you at so and so, and she'd be there. Knowing that she would never tell anybody, like, oh, Marina and I went out and she met this white guy and had her way with him, and now I had to pick her up, that dirty slut. My friend wasn't like that. And the reality of it is, like, people in my community used to look at our friendship, and I always used to wonder, why are they looking at us so strangely? Yes, she was 13 years older than me. And yes, she was my friend, but we weren't lesbian lovers. I I jokingly laugh because it's uncomfortable to talk about, because it shows how ignorant and naive I was, but at the same time, totally blessed. She was having an affair with my brother all this time. And the reality is, like, my keeping that secret also made she also kept my secrets. But see, years before she passed away, we had this conversation because, I had taken this man who had brutally assaulted me to court. And she said, "Yes, Marina, that morning I remember his wife dropped his wife's sister dropped his wife off at my place, and she stayed with me for 2 weeks recovering." And I mean, my friend and I talked about everything under the sun. I mean, could you imagine, like, talking about being a rape victim with a friend, and then she says, "I thought you knew I was having an affair with your brother," and I'd say, "No." I mean, I have letters in 76, 77, her writing to me about how she was trying to push Larry away. Now, her first husband's name was Larry, so I just assumed she was talking about her ex. I didn't think she was talking about my brother. And I told her that. And she said, "I thought you knew." And I said, "No, I didn't." But that in itself, just the friendship of her keeping my secrets, and my like keeping her secret without really knowing that that's what I was doing, made for a very unique relationship in friendship that I will treasure for the rest of my life. Because at any moment, any given moment, like even today as I'm talking to you, if she were here, I'd pick up the phone, I'd say, "Hey, let's go out." What time? I'd say such and such a time. Bang, she'd be there at the drop of a hat. Like, I have acquaintances, I have acquaintances for 3 years when Nathan Chasing Horse was arrested. I said, "I need to go to see him in the trial. This man has been laterally violent to me, talking shit behind my back. I need to face him in court and let him know I'm here." And all of these people said, "Oh, well, Marina, I'll come with you." To the point some are going to, chip in, or most of the time they wanted me to pay for everything. And it was just like my friend, the one I knew for 30 years, she would have paid her own way. She would have been there supporting me. She would have come with me. Like that's what a friend is. Even though the relationship might seem really like in the Christian viewpoint, which again, I have to laugh because this whole notion of "thou shalt not commit adultery," like it really boggles my mind that I would have such a friend, and I was such a friend to her. Even when she passed away, I organized her funeral. To this day, her children, I just, I'm so close to them in a spiritual sense. But I will always hold her close to my heart. And I miss her dearly. Like I said, I make arrangements with people to do certain activities, and it doesn't come through. So when this Yahoo, a non-Indigenous white man from another country, said he was going to come to bear witness of the injustice of Nathan Chasing Horse, stepped forward, like my friend would have stepped forward. I accepted, like I would have accepted my friend's, acknowledgement. But for him to do that in a spiritual way of stepping in like my friend would have, has been so impactful to me. Even after having closure, it didn't really hit me like how my life would be after. But to acknowledge my friend and just the relationship in terms of being Indigenous and being single women. I'm single without a partner or children, and she's living in a community that's not her home community, raising her children, not collecting child support, all because she was afraid when her children grew up they wouldn't have a land base to build their homes. She says, I can't afford to make enemies of my ex-husband or his family. In some way, I just couldn't comprehend that. Again, because I'm not a mother. But for her to sacrifice that way, just the things we shared, the intimate moments of, like, things that you have to give up as an Indigenous woman because you're looking after your children and their future. And I see that with all of my friends. My friend in Edmonton, whose daughter had to escape a very violent relationship, to the point where she was in isolation for about 3 months, under real debriefing psychologically, so she wouldn't go back to him. Because if she went back to him, he'd kill her. My second cousin, whose adult children are in and out of jail, and the fact that they're young men and whatever horrors they experience in the jail while they're there because of systemic racism, it's heartbreaking. Like, as a child growing up and seeing my brothers, what abuse they went through by white men, and being a child unable to advocate for them. I felt that. I can feel it with my second cousin when she's talking about her sons. Or my friend who I've known when she was 15, and even her daughter, like I said, she's had to come from Manitoba to rescue her granddaughter from this abusive Yahoo white guy. And the belligerence, the arrogance, the pride, the like, why even talk to me about all the things you know about Indigenous people? Why? To prove what? That you're a good man? That you're not racist when you're fucking beating the living bejesus out of my granddaughter? Like, excuse me. I wasn't born yesterday. I can sense when some man is trying to have control over another woman. And I can also sense when a woman, doesn't really respect, like, other women because of the situation she put herself in. No other reason. Like, I'm just grateful for the Indigenous women that I do know who are educated. They have degrees, advocating for days, weeks, months, years, because under the Indian Act, we face injustice, and never once are we going to be seeing justice in the courts for racism, like hate crime, nothing like that. But immigrants who come into Canada, who face these hate crimes, do go to court and do get justice. But under the Indian Act, we don't get that. It's part of the systemic system of government, and how the policing oversees us, and how they perceive, what we're capable or not capable of doing. And it's a pretty scary system if you're going to be like a state in the state of observation, like George Orwell's 1980, whatever that book he called, George Orwell, and there'd be surveillance everywhere. And hey, we're evolving. We're evolving in social media. We're evolving where even my narrative will go across to Finland, to Germany, to the Philippines, wherever the social media goes, and how everybody shares my story. And again, sometimes when I'm in a conundrum thinking, why am I doing this? I think it's important because I'm Indigenous. I think it's important because even though we're, say, living in Canada or North America, the difference in terms of environment and how people perceive reality is so totally different. And the fact that even though we believe we're equal, we aren't. And the fact that we believe we have human rights, immigrants have more human rights than we as Indigenous people who are of the land have. The only human rights we have is when we're cloistered in our communities. When we live in our communities, that's First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities. That's what it means to have a status card, because we face injustice every day of our lives. If you're fortunate to have an Indian status card or Métis or Inuit status card, and you live in the urban areas and you have a job, I hope that job and whatever grants you get because you're associated to that card, that somewhere, someplace, you will advocate for all those Indigenous youth who are living in poverty, who need those monies that the government is giving out so freely now. It's gotten to the point where people have to go to jail because they pretended to be Indigenous. They've had to have awards stripped off of their very backs, like Buffy St. Marie, because she pretended to be Indigenous. Like, how pathetic can a white woman be? And how pathetic could Indigenous men roll down and worship the very ground she walks on as if she's white buffalo calf woman? Come on. You know, that's the moral of the story with white buffalo calf woman. Two men approached that calf woman. A cloud came down, and when the cloud disappeared, there was a bag of bones, and there was a young man standing there. Really, when people do not stand up for the human rights of Indigenous women and their children, you're going to turn into a bag of bones, or even how I see you. You're just a bag of bones because you're not there. You can't comprehend it. I hear it and I see it and I live it and I breathe it and I support those Indigenous women every day of their lives, working to support their adult children and their grandchildren. I live it and I breathe it and I talk to my friends, just like my friend who was there for me. Dial her up, let's go. Just like that, she'd drop everything and we'd go out. Everything has a purpose. Everything has a reason. This is just my story. There are thousands of Indigenous women who are living this story, and some of them are struggling so hard because their children have been apprehended, or they're in an abusive relationship and cannot find a way to run away and get healed. So whatever I can do in my podcast, and this is what I try to express to people who think like there's no hope. I advocate, I said there is hope. There is hope in the sense that throughout my life, I never ever thought certain things I'd be able to do, certain things that came to me that I never ever thought I'd even live through. So with that, you know, it's like you just cannot give up. My late mother would say, Creator wants us to never give up. And I think about my mother's aunties, my grandmothers, they never gave up. And the same with my great grandmothers. The life and how hardship and the prayers of those who came before me means that how I've lived is because of that energy. You know, it's a great mystery. And if we feel it and we sense it, and I know you do, I hope you have a good day. And again, if I haven't said good afternoon to Darcy and Marie, thank you for listening, and I'll do another podcast, and hopefully I'll be able to read a book on matriarchy and give some comments about that in the near future. Again, it's the 14th of July. This coming weekend is Sioux Valley Wachipi. In Dakota, that means the powwow, the celebration, the dance. And then the following weekend is Tsuut'ina celebrations. And in Tsuut'ina, we have a golf tournament, rodeo, fastball, hand game, and powwow. So, you know, it's people come, people save money in northern communities and other places to come just for that one event here in Sutina. I know because I've done my tarot card readings during the times that I can set up, and I've met very many people who've traveled just to come to our celebration. And these events are happening all over North America this summer, and they do every year. Sioux Valley is celebrating their 80th year. So imagine, I was 6 years old. Oh wait, no, they had been celebrating 6 years when I was born. So, by the time I could remember making star blankets for my cousin, it was already, let's see, it had already been going on 20 years. So, with that, I just want to encourage Indigenous women to tell your stories, um, tell them how it is, and hopefully it'll give some insight into lateral violence. I don't ask to have violence towards me. It's just the behavior in which there are certain protocols that need to be met and honored by women for their significant other. It's something that has been implanted by the colonial way of thinking. And I don't know how long that will last, or even if it will ever go away. But life is very interesting in the sense of the new discoveries of healthy human sexuality, brain development, neuroscience, even this whole concept of this great mystery that people want to create conspiracies left and right. So with that, I hope you develop critical thinking skills in what is real and what isn't. Have a good day, and I'll talk to you later.